This is Kent Hance, best storyteller in Texas. Hope you enjoy part 2 of my interview with Mike Baselice. He's one of the greatest pollsters in the nation. You'll really enjoy it. In looking at the issues, how do you poll on the issues? Do you do open-ended? Do you come up with issues that you think are the issues, or do you?
A couple different ways. You can ask an open-ended question along the lines of, what's the most important issue facing you and your family? Or what's the most important issue that the United States Congress should be working on? And you get a host of different answers. That costs a little bit more money because all those answers have to be coded, and it takes a little bit longer. Some people will just, you give them a chance to say more than yes, no, agree, disagree. They'll give you their life story. And
right.
We've got some really long verbatim responses sometimes. Or it can be asked in a closed-ended question. Which of the following issues is the most important issue that the United States Congress or the Texas legislature should be addressing? And you try and limit that to 8 short answers. And you can put on there education, transportation, property taxes, and so forth. Now, you can also get very specific. And it took a couple years to figure out. I go back to my first year in a legislative session. Well, it was my second year, because my first year was 97. So in 99, I did a poll on something that we don't like to say the V word anymore. We don't like to say school vouchers.
Right.
It's school choice, it's education, savings accounts, and back then they were called vouchers. And along the way, we learned to test different ways that we could see what level of support there would be. And we found the most support, 70% support, when we asked voters in the state of Texas, do you support or oppose allowing the money for a child's education to follow that child to the public, private, parochial, or charter school
right.
on the parents' choosing? Oh, sure, that money should follow the child, right? Big difference between that and I split sample these questions even recently. Vouchers will drop support down 20 points. Vouchers have been demonized. It's just the same thing that was learned years ago. When you want to learn through split sampling techniques, you give half the voters one phrase and half another. Some voters think, yeah, there should be an estate tax, and you should be taxed on your estate when you die. But when they tested, how about being taxed on your death? That's not the same thing. Voters don't want to be taxed on death. It's
right.
bad enough that the person died. Now you're going to tax them? But an estate sounds like there's some resources there.
Yeah.
There's a tennis court, and a swimming pool, and a pond, and all in the backyard. So maybe that person has a little bit that they should donate to the system. So a lot is learned through specific wording, and then there's general wording.
What percent of your business is for political candidates versus political issues, or even commercial issues that may have nothing to do with the politics,
sure,
but just how people think about things?
Yeah, it used to be a slight majority over a 2-year cycle, we'd have to say, because an even year, we're going to get a lot more candidate work than in an odd year. But it used to be about 60% candidate, maybe 30% policy and initiative, and 10% consumer. Now I'd say it's probably about 30% candidate, maybe 55% initiative and policy, and about 15% corporate image and marketing. I mean, we've done diaper cream. We've done laser hair removal.
Right.
Not much of it, but we set it up the same way. We find out, like for the diaper cream client, I only knew about A&D and Desitin when our kids were little. And most people, had a tube of that stuff sitting around for their grandkids, or
sure,
probably threw it away. We had Dr. Smiths come along and ask us to do a survey. Now, it's hard to find people with babies by picking up the phone and calling. You're going to hang up on 97% of the population. We went to a panel. A panel's another great way to do some marketing, because the panels have the age, the gender, the location of the person, and even if they have kids and how old the kids are. So we interviewed parents of newborns to toddlers who were using diaper cream. And we found out where Dr. Smith stood relative to A&D and Destin and other brands. And then we provided information to see what would make them more likely to consider Dr. Smith's. All natural ingredients, Chancellor. Boy, who doesn't want
natural ingredients?
They provided money, I think, to St. Jude's Hospital every year. And they put that on the box, so they could, people could see that their involvement in the bigger picture. So that helped in a marketing sense direct their messaging.
Sure. You did a poll for me one time on electrical providers in Lubbock, and did one for waste in Andrews County.
Low-level radioactive waste.
Yeah. And it was very helpful. It allowed us to know what people were thinking, what was important to them, how we packaged our message, how we made sure we stayed on top of the messaging.
Well, we're more or less like an X-ray technician. Pollsters give you a snapshot of what's going on in the body or the system in which we're dealing with. Luckily, we have people around us that are media consultants, whether it's for small clips on the internet or print, communication specialists who take that information and get a little bit more creative with it. But another way to look at it, another analogy I use is we're like one of those coaches up in the booth with the binoculars looking down, calling plays down to the sideline. We don't really care if it's a Philly special that's going to get us in the end zone or running off tackle. Our job is to figure out what works. I don't have any feelings about what's going to help your son-in-law, Phil Sorrell, win his election or any other corporate client. You don't want me to have a feeling. You want me to just find out.
I had a poster one time I used it, and he was an unusual guy, Dickie Morris. And he was a little cray-cray. And I've said that before, and he said, you don't have to say that. And I said, well, it's true, isn't it? And he said, absolutely. But he did polling for Jesse Helms. He did it for Bill Clinton. And he did it for, what was the liberal senator from Ohio for so long? Nussbaum or Nuss, and he did it for him. And Morris used to say, I don't care. I'm just trying to get you information, and you make the decision what you want to do. I don't care. And he was always an unusual guy.
Yeah, he was. I got a Dick Morris story. He, I was working for 1 week with Lance Torrance, and we were working on a special election in Mississippi. You remember when Mickey Leland died in a plane wreck? Within like a week or two of that, another congressman from Mississippi died in a plane wreck. I think his name was Larkin Smith, if I'm not mistaken. And Gene Taylor, Democrat, was running, and the chief of staff for Trent Lott was running. And we were trying to help the chief of staff for Trent Lott. And the NRCC was paying for the polling. And I had just come from the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, where I did opposition research. I'm just learning the polling business. And so my partners at the time, they were senior to me, had stayed up late that night. We're going through the data as it came out of the field. I came in the morning. I'm just trying to learn the phone system. Lance Torrance had 167 phones there in North Houston, and I'm just learning things. And a call comes in from Dick Morris, and he wants the polling data from the night before. And I knew enough to not
was he working for the Democrat? Or?
No. Here's what he said. They gave the call to me because they didn't know what to do with this guy. And he said, hi, I'm Dick Morris. I'm the consultant for Trent Lott. His guy's running in the special election. I know you guys are doing polling. I need to know the data. The guys had worked late the night before. I was going to call them early in the morning and wake them up. And I thought real quick, what am I going to say to this fella? I can either confirm or deny we're engaged in any polling at this time. I know you're doing polling. I know the NRCC is paying for it. By golly, I need to know what's going on because it's my client's guy that's running. I need to know the data. I can either confirm or deny we're engaged in any polling at this time. You are a polling firm, aren't you? He's yelling at me through the phone. He was screaming at me and hung up. I was a little shaky, and I remember telling that to my senior people, Ed Goez and And Brian Tringali, when they came in, they had a good laugh. They thought that was funny. They picked up the phone and they yelled at Dick Morris, "Don't you ever try and browbeat any of our people into giving you data that you're not rightfully entitled to because you're not paying for it." "I know. I just want to know what's going on." So he tried. The better one was we were doing a survey in East Texas. Charlie not Stenholm. Who was the East Texas congressman?
Ralph Hall?
No. Good time Charlie.
Oh, Charlie Wilson.
Charlie Wilson.
Yeah.
You served with him, right?
Oh, yeah.
Charlie finds out that there's a poll going on in his district. I think she ran twice, named Donna Peterson. She was a Republican, West Point grad or something. And Charlie Wilson calls. Charlie thought everyone was his friend. You met Charlie once. You probably did like him. And he was on a panel, I think, with Ed Goez, the head of the firm at the time, because Lance was retired. So Charlie calls, and luckily I didn't get the call. It went right to my voicemail there in North Houston. This is before I started my firm. I was still with the Terrence Group. And he says, "This is Charlie Wilson. I understand you're doing a poll in my district. I sure would like to know those results. Could you give me a call?" He leaves his number. I'm thinking, this is unbelievable, right? He called back 2 days later. Again, I wasn't at my desk, and it went to voicemail. And I thought, you got to hand it to him. He's trying.
Trying to get the results.
Trying to get the results of something for the opponent, yeah.
You have people that'll piggyback on a poll. That they'll want one question, on how they're doing. They may have already done the poll on everything else. Do y'all do that very much?
Oh, yeah. I had a piggyback question added to a poll on this THC issue about whether or not it should be outright banned or more highly regulated and used for some medicinal purposes. And somebody threw that out the day that there was a big press conference with the Senate leadership and the law enforcement. But that's a great way to do a cost-effective version of a survey. If you just want to know one thing, you can ask where a race stands. In this case, it was two positions. Should it be outright banned or allowed to continue with higher regulation? Or another way I do these questions, such and such is a good idea because X, Y, and Z. Such and such is a bad idea because of A, B, C. And you rotate those two choices. So you simulate a mini campaign or both sides of an argument for the respondent. And it's just to do one question on a survey of 300 people with 5 or 6 demographics is nowadays truly a $12,000, $13,000 proposition. Why? Because it takes so many dials to get somebody on the phone. When I started in the business, I remember Lance Torrance, director of operations, was bemoaning the situation we were in. She says, "I don't know what we're going to do. We're going from 1.5 refusals to 2 refusals for every completed interview. This is Armageddon. This is the end of the world as we know it." Well, now, and it's been this way for a good 15 years, we're getting 15, 16 refusals for every completed interview.
Wow.
Now, how does any of this work if we're getting all these refusals? Because we keep calling until we get the right gender, age, partisan, and racial, ethnic breakdown in each region of a district or state. It just takes more work. You can run, but you can't hide forever.
But it's a costly thing. A good poll will cost you $30,000 to $50,000.
Statewide polls will be $60,000, $70,000.
Yeah.
Now, what's helping to reduce some of that cost is we're now adding in about 30 to 35% of our dials will be text-to-cell invites. You did it in your son-in-law's race for DA where you send text messages like the Trump endorsement.
Right.
And we saw a lot more of that type of texting in campaigns in the last 2 or 3 election cycles. We're also sending a lot of those invites to people's cell phones so they can take the survey on their own. And they can actually read the questions faster than somebody can read questions to them over the phone. And that keeps the cost down.
The polling, you'll go along and you don't know what's happening. You have people, every candidate runs kind of a poll in their own mind as they go out and meet people. But I know in the 84 Senate race, in the primary, and I was running against Kruger and Doggett, only after I went on television did, no matter where you went, people, would say, "I saw your ad," or something like that. And before then, people say, now, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? Oh, you were a congressman. They don't know. But once you get on television and you're there with one of the things we always try to get is the 6 o'clock and the 10 o'clock news. Voters watch the news.
But that has changed too. You remember we grew up in that day and age.
Right.
When there was 3 broadcast stations. We were lucky to have a UHF converter box on our TV so we could watch the Phillies and the Sixers and the Flyers and some reruns. Now, I don't know what 1,000 gross rating points really means, because you would buy 1,000 gross rating points to make sure enough eyes really knew that ad.
Right.
And now we don't know with all the different options that people have. We used to ask a question about 20 years ago, do you get your signal through cable television or satellite? The more rural you were in terms of where you lived, the more likely you had satellite. But if you live in a more suburban area, an urban area, you had cable. Now those are way behind 2 other choices. Do you get your signal through streaming that's commercial supported, streaming that's not commercial supported, satellite or cable? And those 2 streaming methods are the ways in which people get their information on TV programming.
It's trending more that way.
Oh, it's the majority.
Yeah. That we saw that in a lot of races, that in Phil's race, that if you're doing streaming, if you're buying ads on streaming, versus going to Fox News and buying ads, you're hitting different people.
Sure. If you're a Republican in a primary, you want that Fox News, get as much of that as you can still. If you're a Democrat, you probably want MSNBC. But in a general election, you've got to be more spread than that, and you got to try other channels. There's a lot of internet ads, banner ads that go out.
But I was talking about the mention of the 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock news. A lot of people don't watch the 6 and 10 o'clock news anymore. They'll just get on the internet and check headlines with various sources, and they'll read whatever they want to, or they'll go to the Drudge Report or some report that they believe in, that they like, and that's how they get their information.
Didn't you, when you were in the state Senate, and I know the governor, lieutenant governor had it even in the early 2000s, but back in the 70s, wasn't there a clipping service that would kind of take all the papers around the state, and they would take Xerox copies of the articles, and you would get a set of clippings on your desk.
Right, every day.
Every day. And that's how we learned the news that went around the state.
Well, you can look and see what the Beaumont Enterprise was saying, or the San Antonio Light, or the San Antonio News Express, and they'd have the editorials in there as well as the front page papers with the headlines. A lot of people don't realize this, but the person that's writing the story is not the person that writes the headlines in a newspaper. And that's the reason that sensational headlines, that they grab you so you'll read that story.
Back in 2008, I got a call a couple days before the Democrat primary and Republican primary, so it must have been late April or late February, and we're looking at early March election. And our old friend Gardner Selby asked me, what do you think is going to happen on Tuesday between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama here in Texas? I said, well, Gardner, I poll in Republican primary circles. I don't have any Democrat primary information, and it was a Friday. And he says, I need something. I'm on a deadline. Well, of course, all the reporters are on a deadline. And so I use this line many a time, thinking I'd just be a little flippant. So I said, well, Gardner, this election's going to hinge on who turns out. I hear the typing. Oh, that's great. What else? Well, it's not only going to hinge on who turns out, but how many of them. Oh, great. Headline, I think on the Sunday paper, it's dated March 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, whatever it was, Democrat primary, or election hinges on turnout. I think Rich Oppel woke up to see that headline on his print edition and said, I don't know who wrote the headline. Garner was responsible for writing the article. Of course, every election hinges on turnout. That's the stupidest headline I'd ever seen. And the electronic edition was changed within a few hours. But I kept a copy of something I've wanted to just get quoted on that once, and they made it the headline.
That's hilarious. I had a vote that a story that ran in the Lubbock paper and the Amarillo paper. In the headline, the stories were exactly the same, but the headline in both were opposite. You know, Hance moves to cut deficit. Hance votes to increase deficit. You know, I mean, they were just opposite. It's the same story.
Yeah.
And you realize someone's writing that headline, and they're trying to get people's attention one way or the other, and doing the best they can at it. What's the most exciting race that you've covered?
Probably the most exciting because it was very important to get it right. All elections are important to get right, but imagine I'm 38 years old. It's 1998. I'm on my first cycle out on my own after being with the Terrence group for 3 election cycles, and I'm working on this race for Rick Perry against John Sharp. And the conventional wisdom is John Sharp is, the leader, and of course you got George W. Bush beating the heck out of Gary Morrow.
That wasn't a close race.
Wasn't close. He was.
They were trying to run up Bush's numbers.
They did a good job doing it. They almost got to 70%. It was 68 and change, maybe rounded to 69, and but down ballot wasn't going as well, and there was a lot of gnashing of teeth and such in the last week, and I ended up doing my own tracking for the final week, and adding 50 more interviews to it. Tracking
means you were checking every night. You were running a poll every night to see what the trend was.
And John Sharp attacked Rick Perry every Friday, and we found
for Sunday's paper.
Friday was the day to put out a new attack because you couldn't respond to it until maybe Monday because the logs get closed early in the afternoon, and whatever you bought is set for the weekend. So he has 3 days in the clear to attack. And we kept taking it on the chin, and we wanted to go on the attack. And I remember Deirdre Lisi left this meeting to go come back with a file because I remember there was some sales tax increases that were voted on in the legislature when John Sharp was in the Senate, and she found it within seconds, less than a minute, because we were going on the hitting up John Sharp for some type of tax increase, and there was some disagreement as to whether or not that should be the tax increase. I said, what about sales taxes? I think there was a sales tax increase that he voted for.
Right.
So we changed the ad to do that. There was a lot of back and forth about whether we should run the ad, a lot of cross pressures. What happened in that race was a little bit of luck. John Sharp stopped attacking us on Wednesday before the election, and we went from being down
before the election the next Tuesday.
Yeah,
so 6 days out, he stopped,
and at 7 days out, we were down a point or two. And as he came off the attack and went positive, he had this ad. He's wearing a denim shirt. He's on this porch of it looks like a log cabin or a country house. I'll be an independent voice for Texas. I'll be my own person. I won't be tied to any party and all this. He basically took his foot off of our neck because our attack ad never ran fully. It only leaked out a little bit in a few stations where we couldn't stop it from running. And we rebounded. He had one foot on our neck and should have kept kicking with the other foot. And he let us up off the canvas, and we won by 2.5 points.
I remember that election because some of the Bush people didn't want you running those ads.
That's
because
true.
They thought it'd cut down on his numbers.
I don't know what they
and that he could win anyway.
Yeah. Well,
that Perry would win anyway.
That's why I think it was important to do our own polling because, like I said, I learned most polling was coming out of the field 10, 12 points more Republican than Democrat, and the state at the time was only about 5 points more Democrat than Republican. Just 4 years earlier, the state was break even, and now we're trending a little bit more Republican. We got into the 2002, 2006 elections. Now we're a 10-point Republican state, and it's been that way ever since. We need to talk about that in a minute. I remember on election night, I was, there was a lot of cross pressures as to whose numbers were right. And I remember at about 9:15, Rick Perry came in to give the cautiously optimistic speech. And he walked by me, and there's some band playing, and there's people cheering. And he grabs my hand, shake my hand, and he says, "We going to be okay?" And I said, "I think so, but it's going to be close." He turns to go on stage, but he grabs my hand with this type of handshake, like you're doing like this.
Yeah.
Like this. And he pulls me up to his face, and he's yelling at me because it's so loud. And he says, nobody's ever going to question your numbers again, which was the greatest affirmation I was able to get from a client. And then 2 hours later, he went down and gave the victory speech. I remember when we were waiting to see the vote come in, he had gone from a 20,000 to 25, 30, 50,000 vote lead. And Ray Sullivan got a call from Eric Burse, who was downstairs near all the cameras and reporters. Hey, it's after 11. What are you going to do? And so Ray's got Eric on his cell phone, and he's like, or something. He says, what are we going to do here? And I said, let's call it. And Carney was there, Dave Carney, and Jim Arnold was the campaign manager, and Rick's looking at me. I said, you've gone from 25,000 to 50,000, now over 75,000 vote lead. Well, there's still vote out. Well, there's always vote outs, I said to whoever. And one by one, all the Republican senators are starting to show up who weren't so sure that they should go against John Sharp. Now everyone's on the Rick Perry bandwagon all of a sudden because he's maintained this lead. I said, well, Commissioner, because he was ag commissioner at the time, I said, you right here represent an 85,000 vote block of granite. They can chisel away, but if you notice, this 2.4% lead hasn't changed all night. Just the margin, as the vote comes in, gets a little larger. They can't whittle that down to zero. He says, let's call it. And downstairs we went, and he called the election. So that was the most exciting one because of how close it was.
Sure.
And it was a career-changing moment for me.
Big time.
And I'm always grateful to him for letting me do that polling. He was a great candidate. He could deliver a script. He let the team around him figure out all the political stuff so he could govern. And he was good. He was a good retail politician. He understood people.
He was a very good retail politician, and he was a good governor because he would select people and try to make sure they did their job and reported to him and move forward.
You know, my last roommate I had was a guy named Mark Maddox up in Washington, D.C. before Julie and I got married. I married an Austin girl. And fast forward, he had been a chief of staff for somebody in Congress, and then he'd worked at the Department of Energy. And there's a thing called the landing team where 2 or 3 people go into each department of the federal government to see who's a career type and who maybe should stay and who needs to go as the transition comes through. And here we are in late 2016, and Mark asked me, as he was on the landing team for energy, if I could get my resume to Rick Perry. And I got it to Rick Perry, but it was important to be up front and tell Rick that Mark had Lou Gehrig's disease, the early onset of Lou Gehrig's disease. Rick Perry hired Mark and probably extended that young man's life by 3-4 years by giving him a purpose every day. And Mark was good. Everyone loved Mark.
Oh, yeah, he was excellent.
You got to hand it. That's the type of person that he was when he saw people that were good people that should be actually helping out in government.
That's good. That's good. There was some other issue you mentioned a while ago that we wanted to go back.
About the state of Texas and how it's changed.
Yeah, the change. A lot of people say, well, it's going to be a blue state or a purple state, or, I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, the state has to go purple before it goes blue. And what is a purple?
And it's not purple now.
Purple state would be Democrats have half the statewide offices. Republicans have half the statewide offices. Democrats have one chamber like the House, and Republicans have the Senate, or vice versa. It's nowhere close to that. Nowhere close. I looked at data back in the early 2000s because one of the concerns was as the Hispanic Latino community becomes a greater percentage of the voting bloc, what happens to Texas? And I ran the numbers through that if nothing else changes, by 2030, the state will be back to parity. And that would be with Hispanic Latinos voting 36% Republican, because that's what they did in 98 and 2002. And every 4 years, I've had the great benefit of working on statewide races in Texas. I worked for every winning lieutenant governor since Rick Perry. So any of us that have been alive, we've all seen only 3 Republican lieutenant governors, Perry, Dewhurst, and now Patrick. And I collect 5,000 to 6,000 interviews and tracking, so I have a lot of data to look at right after the election and see how it stacks up. What has happened is 2 very important demographic changes in the state. One is that the Latino Hispanic community has moved from 36% Republican to almost 44% Republican between the early 2000s and 2022. So doesn't that make the state even more Republican than it was? Well, while the Hispanic community is voting more Republican, Anglos in urban suburban Texas, Montgomery County, Fort Bend, Harris, Williamson, Travis, Bear, Dallas, Tarrant, Collin, those counties have seen the Anglos under the age of 50 in the last 14 years go from 2/3 Republican to 50% Republican.
Right.
So it's wiped out all the gains Republicans have made with the Hispanic Latino community, resulting in the state staying over the last 20 years, on average, about 9 to 10 points more Republican.
That's interesting. That you do see they're picking up, but in counties like Dallas County 20 years ago was a solid Republican county. Now it is a solid Democrat county.
The least Republican county in the state, even less Republican than any South Texas county, is Travis County.
Yeah,
it only votes on average about 28% Republican.
Yeah, it's tough being a Republican in Travis County.
Yeah, Dallas used to be a solid red, like you're saying. It's not even a 40% Republican county.
Yeah,
Bear County is in the high 30s.
Tarrant County is the only large county that's still Republican.
It's about 53 or 54%
right.
Republican, but it's trended down. I remember when it used to be 62, 61. It's trending down. The urban centers of Texas are trending more Democratic. And as the suburban rural areas, particularly the rural areas, have become even more Republican.
The rural areas, I told, Senator, Cruz, when he was running against Beto, you got to get out to West Texas and campaign. And he said, I'm going to carry it. I said, they don't know that Beto's in the race that much. And everyone they talk to is for Cruz. You got to get out there and scare them so they'll go vote. And he spent September and October a lot of time I call it the Magnificent Seven: Amarillo, Lubbock, Midland, Odessa, San Angelo, Abilene, and Wichita Falls. Mm-hmm. And really scaring them that we could lose this race. He won those 7 cities, in not including the rural areas around them, which he won even larger. But he won those 7 cities, big time. And in Exeter County, he got 82% of the vote. Well, that offsets a lot of things from cities, and that is a hardcore Republican area, those 7 cities. And the rural areas around them are even more so.
Yeah, right now, West Texas is only 8 to 9% of the vote that turns out, but you need to run those margins up there as a Republican to help you out in this, because Dallas and Bear and Travis aren't going to get you very much. El Paso's not going to help you out either.
And if you've got those 7, those are big time for you. And if you add Tyler and Longview and Marshall and Lufkin and East Texas and East Texas rural areas, you run up some big numbers. And but the cities, the metropolitan counties, are trending more with the Anglo moving more to the Democrats.
You remember Sam Addisley?
Oh yeah, he started with the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. He covered my first race.
There you go. Sam called me one time, and he was interested in picking a county in East Texas. It might have been Marion County or something he went to, because he started looking and seeing how they were voting at the top of the ticket. Nixon carried the state in '72. Ford did not carry the state in '76, though, against Jimmy Carter. But there was, I think Reagan outperformed the railroad commissioner in '84 by 15 or 16 points. And so when you look at all these races, the Republicans were doing well at the top of the ticket, but they didn't really have a farm system. They didn't have county commissioners then running for state rep. They just had to be recruited to run for state rep. And Sam started to notice that there were some local races in which Republicans were actually finally running. And a lot of these counties that used to be Democrat controlled at the county commissioner's court are now Republican run.
In 1988, I ran for re-election as railroad commission. Clements appointed me in 87, and that there was not anyone as a Republican in a statewide race except Clements. And in 88, I won. And that I became the first person to win a Republican office below governor or U.S. Senate. We'd had a governor and had a U.S. senator, but we'd had nothing below that in the statewide race. And I was the first one in 88. And in 98, there was not one Democrat left in the statewide race. That's how fast it changed.
Yeah, your win helped spur on people like Kay Bailey running for treasurer in 90 and Rick Perry running for ag commissioner in 90 as Republicans. And the 90s was a big sea change for Republicans, but it started gradually with some of the things in the 80s. Phil Gramm winning the 84 race, him resigning his seat,
right,
and rerunning as a Republican. So there was many places in the South changed. Texas wasn't the only one, because you brought it up earlier in our conversation. Democrats in the South looked at D.C. and said, those D.C. Democrats aren't like
They're
me.
not us.
They're not us.
You know, they'd be watching on TV and they were yelling about something, and they'd look at their spouse and say, that's not us. And the spouse say, that's surely not us. And so the more media they got, I just wonder what the Democrats think. When they come up with defund the police, I mean, that was the stupidest argument for an issue that I've ever heard. And it drove the policemen and firemen and first responders away from them, and those had been traditional Democratic voters. And defund the police, they could have gone all day and not come up with a more stupid idea than defund the police.
Now you have certain places like Austin that don't have the same number of police officers per capita that other major cities have. They haven't been able to get back after what did they cut, $150 million
right.
in the budget and put it into other services, and it's been somewhat problematic, all the way down to the morale levels.
The 2016 presidential election was off the mark. Everyone thought that Hillary was going to be the next president. And, the thing, I didn't know the polling. I was looking at the polling just like everyone else. But when Trump shows up at midnight, in Michigan or Wisconsin or something, and they've got 40 or 50,000 people show up, you go, golly, are they missing something? And what happened to polling in 2016, in your opinion?
The media couldn't be wrong, so they told us the polling was wrong, I guess. And if you look back, and I have a graphic I can add to our conversation, you can superimpose our faces with this graphic. I went back and I looked at a lot of that data. The Real Clear Politics, and still does, post all these publicly released polls. And they average them together.
Right.
In the final week of the 2016 election, there were 23 national polls. They had Hillary Clinton up by 2.7%. She won by 2.1%.
Of the popular vote.
Of the popular vote, which is what a national poll measures. A pollster gets within 0.6 of a point, they're pretty darn happy.
Yeah.
And these polls are all done slightly different ways. The statewide numbers were also pretty good in a number of the states. I think there was a 2-point lead or so that Clinton held in Pennsylvania, and Trump won by 0.7%. Something similar occurred in Michigan. I think Hillary Clinton was up by 3 points, and Trump just barely won it. The problem with some of those state polls is that there aren't enough of them right up until the final week. When I made that prediction in the Rick Perry Sharp race, I had data right on the eve of the election. All right, we polled right through the final week, and I made a prediction on Monday before Tuesday. Now we know in Texas, 3/4 of the vote is cast before Election Day itself. We have to interview those people still and ask them how they did vote, so we get an accurate read. So in defense of the industry, there just wasn't enough data on some of the state level information to get a good gauge of what was going on at the very end. Because they'll have 4 polls in Michigan that cover the last 2 weeks.
Right.
And things change rapidly. Remember the famous headline that Truman held up that says
Yeah.
Dewey wins in 1948? You know that information was based off of information that the Gallup poll put out a month before the election. A month. They thought information wouldn't change that much in a month. Now we see information can change. I showed you in 1998, we saw Vic Prairie going from 2 down to 2.5 up in a week. So you need to monitor this all the way through. The last couple elections were also spot on. The models were wrong in 2016. They said, well, Hillary's got a slight lead here, add it all up, and there's an 83% chance she'll win. And when it didn't happen, Nate Silver had a headline that said, polling couldn't keep up with the changing demographics. That's a headline you can go back and see. And I was thinking, what do you mean? The demographics shouldn't change. You mentioned it earlier in our conversation. You want to do a poll the same way each time.
If you're making a mistake, make the same mistake every time.
All I would do in your situation is I would take the first 5 names in the first column in the first poll, go to the second column in the next poll, the third column in the third poll. Find some consistent manner in which you're getting information, calling the right number of interviews by geography and so forth. And it's just important to have up to the date, up to the minute information if you're going to make these calls. And demographics shouldn't change. Why look at a statewide poll for somebody running in the fall of 2022 or coming up in 2026? I'm looking for the same 9-10 point Republican advantage each night. Because what am I going to do? Report to my client, oh, you fell 5 points over the last 3 nights, but it's only because I had 5 points less Republicans in the poll. Why would I do that? We know how the state votes. We know who votes. And so polling needs to reflect that.
Right. Mike, thank you for being on the podcast. I can tell people if you're ever going to run a poll and need somebody, Mike Baselice is the best. I've used him for campaigns, and I've used him for issues, commercial issues. And he's always been very accurate, and I really appreciate you taking the time off.
Appreciate you, Chancellor.